Hello, this is our new studio for our Tennessee Williams conversations. That's sort of how he sounds. It's supposed to look like Key West. Tennessee Williams lived there a long time and did a lot of his work there. Had this little house behind the house that I think he called it Madhouse, where he did a lot of his writings. Here's a little interesting story before we start talking about the first major successful play, Glass Menagerie. But he and a friend were walking down one of the streets in Key West, and a couple of tough guys came up and started harassing the two of them. And they didn't seem to like the fact that these two guys were gay or something. They were shocked to find that on the streets of Key West there could be like gay people. So he started to threaten them, like, hey, you guys are going to get your ass kicked. We're going to kick your butt. So Tennessee's friend, whose name I don't remember, said, we got to get out of here. These guys are going to beat the hell out of us. But Tennessee said, I'm not accustomed to running. So they got beat up. And later on, his friend said to him, Tennessee, I really have to admire your courage that you did that. It was really tough because these guys were rough on us. And you just said you were not accustomed to running. And Tennessee said, oh, I didn't mean that. I mean, I'm not accustomed to running. I seldom run. I'm afraid I might have a heart attack. So, our opening joke. It's fine. So, Glass Menagerie first, not everyone's favorite. But let's just talk about what an odd thing in a way to write a play about. There's a sort of a establishing shot, the way movies often open, onto these characters. You've seen an establishing shot. One of the most, I don't know, maybe one of the best known is the opening of Psycho, where you're looking at I think it's Phoenix, and then a little part of Phoenix, and the camera comes a little closer to some buildings in Phoenix, and then to a window, one of those buildings in Phoenix, and goes in, until you see Janet Leigh and John Gavin, with Janet Leigh wearing a gigantic bra, which apparently was something that people did in the late 50s and the early 60s. But now you have the camera on the characters. And as it turns out, those characters are nobodies. They're not important. What winds up happening turns out to be important and entertaining, but the same is true for Glass Menagerie. Their camera, so to speak, comes in this introductory passage, kind of preface of where they live. And they are nobodies. This family, the Wingfield family, are nobodies. Nobody gives a shit about them. They're new to St. Louis. They're in a crappy section of St. Louis. They come from a place where there was some respect. I believe it was Clarksdale, Mississippi, where they lived, I believe, with their mom, Mrs. Wingfield. Tennessee Williams' mom, Edwina. Her dad was a bishop, and I think they lived with him. But so the zoom in is at a terrible place, and I'll just give you a line or two from the introduction. They lived in one of those buildings that has a hive-like conglomeration of cellular living units. Doesn't it sound like animals? And you can hear an animal barking in the background. And once in a while you can hear a power saw, because there's these things happen in Key West. They have cellular living units that flower as warty growths in overcrowded urban centers of lower middle-class population. It's symptomatic of the impulse of the largest and fundamentally enslaved section of American society. That's how it was back then. Poor people and the lower middle class people weren't considered important, and they didn't matter much, and they didn't catch much slack. Of course, all that's changed now. But it's just like nobody's stashed away with other nobodies. But this particular nobody is the family that will eventually produce a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. So the major characters, and it's an autobiographical play. The major characters are Tom, and it's Tom Wingfield. That is based on Tennessee, but Tennessee's real name is Thomas Lanier Williams. He then became Tennessee for many years later. Then Amanda, most incredible nag ever to walk across the stage. That's Edwina, Tennessee Williams' mom, and apparently she was much like Amanda. Then there's little Laura, who's called crippled and lame. She limped. She at one point wore a brace on her leg, so she has this I don't know what the right word for it is, but it makes her kind of homegirl, and she doesn't want to get out. She's extraordinarily shy. And she is based on Tennessee Williams' sister Rose, who did not limp, but had serious psychological issues, and eventually I think was diagnosed as schizophrenia and a couple other things where she just started making no sense, kind of go over the top, scared her mom, and they wound up having to give her a lobotomy. I think this happened in 1943. The play was first produced in 1944. World War II is still going on, but it's set in the 1930s, so you can imagine the economy wasn't too rich, especially in a really crappy part of St. Louis. So there are these three characters, the Wingfield family, based on the Williams family. Something missing? Yes. The dad isn't there. The dad never actually left the family. The dad in the play wasn't there. He left the family, but in real life, Cornelius Coffin Williams, C.C. Williams, Tennessee's dad, was there physically. But he didn't, he wasn't a big fan of Tennessee. He didn't care for Rose, Tennessee's sister. Didn't seem to care much for Edwina, Tennessee's mom. Cornelius did nothing but belittle and make fun of Tennessee when he was young Tom. He often would call him Miss Nancy. You can probably imagine. It's always disappointed him. He just always ridiculed him. So both Tennessee and Rose, they kind of had to hide away, keep away from their loud dad. By the way, speaking of autobiography, the dad sort of becomes a figure that inspired Big Daddy. Ooh, construction. Big Daddy and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which seems to be most of your favorites. So the dad in the autobiography, he's gone, but there is a picture of him when he was in the military. He was a doughboy. It's kind of interesting that, and he's in a frame, and his time is frozen. That's it. The rest of the Wingfield is not quite so fortunate. There's going to be change, and it's not change that some of them were hoping for. There's somebody else missing from the autobiographical nature of this play, and that's Tennessee Williams' younger brother, Dakin. I hope that's how it's pronounced, Dakin. Tennessee's dad loved Dakin. Dakin was a real boy. Dakin was more of an athlete, grew up to be a politician. So, and Tennessee and Dakin, for the most part, were not close. So he just went away. He's not in the play at all. He was much younger than Rose and Tom. Rose was just a few years older than Tom. And that's a pretty loud saw going on over there. I hope you can hear me. What would Tennessee Williams do in a situation like this? I think he would say, that is a hostile noise, and I'm going to have to insist that you make it go away. I added an Irish at the end. My bad. So it's just autobiographical. So we know that much. And there's other things. I made a little list of the qualities, almost like there's almost like separate plays, or certainly separate ways of looking at Glass Menagerie. I hate to interrupt myself, but that's what I do all the time. It's not everybody's favorite play. I know a lot of people personally who simply don't like it. They can't stand it. And I blame that on two things. One, they're being wrong. Two, possibly poor teaching. And sometimes that poor teaching would come from me. But I think it's a magical play, and it's underrated by many people. So first of all, it's autobiographical, not told in a conventional way, but it's autobiographical. It has many elements of the fairy tale, which we'll talk about perhaps next time. And it is postmodern before there's postmodern. So we can call it pre-postmodern ironic biblical allusions. There are plenty of biblical references. They're maybe somewhat subtle in the play, but they don't turn out the way they did in the original, in the Bible. It also focuses on or includes an existential ethical crisis. Like, what is it all about looking after yourself, or looking out for your family? What's your responsibility to your family? What's the responsibility for you to be who you really are? Because that's really why you're here? Or do you just hang out and watch these people? It's also about a dysfunctional family. Every member in a dysfunctional family is wearing the wrong clothes. They are cast in the wrong role, and they can't help it, and is not happy. And I believe that's probably enough for now. I'd like to stop while they're still sawing and give you a really uplifting quote from that Tennessee Williams wrote in an essay about Glass Menagerie. Time is short and it doesn't return again. It is slipping away while I write this and while you read it. And the monosyllable of the clock is loss, 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 unless you devote your heart to its opposition. And I'll close with the words of David Byrne near the beginning of the documentary, Stop Making Sense. Does anyone have any questions?